So with that, let's get things kicked off. Our first speaker this morning is Eric Mill, who is Senior Advisor to the Federal Chief Information Officer in the Biden-Harris administration. In 2019, Eric served on the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration's Democratic staff as a Senior Technology Advisor on election security. Before that, he had a great stint at the GSA, where he led a number of government-wide technology policy initiatives and also oversaw the development of login.gov, which we talked about quite a bit yesterday. So with that, welcome, Eric. Glad you could be with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. All right, I will go ahead and share my screen here. All right, are we all shared? Okay, I'll assume yes. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. So as Jeremy mentioned, I work for the Office of Management and Budget. I work for the part of the Office of Management and Budget. I work for the Federal Chief Information Officer. We oversee the IT and cybersecurity practices of federal agencies and of how federal agencies operate and how they deliver on their missions through technology. So today I want to talk about strong authentication in the US government and beyond. And I say and beyond, not because I can speak for other organizations, but because one of the key concepts in this that I'm going to talk about is really about ensuring alignment and interoperability between the US government and the rest of the world, making sure that we are not an island. So right now, the federal government is in the middle of a cybersecurity overhaul. There are a huge number of activities going on relating to cybersecurity across the whole government. 2021 was a very busy year on this front. 2022 looks to be just as busy. There are too many pieces of that effort to talk about. I'm going to focus on one of those efforts today, which is OMB's Zero Trust strategy. And I'm going to focus on a particular part of that, which is our emphasis on authentication. I think it's worth emphasizing as we talk about doing things to improve the security of large, complicated enterprises, which is always a daunting task. It's important to remember that security is rarely, if ever, about any kind of perfect protection or about creating something that is unhackable or is just a perfect perimeter. What we need to be able to do in security, and particularly in enterprise security, is to raise the costs to adversaries to make it through, whether just to make it so there are fewer of those attacks, to reduce the number that are successful, to deter them in the first place by making it not worth their while, and shrink the impact and number of those things in a way that stabilizes the world that we live in. And to do that, we really need to be looking for opportunities to raise these costs, not by incremental amounts, not at the margins, but looking for places where we can do order of magnitude improvements. I think it's also important to understand that security and usability, people have a way of seeing them as in conflict. Maybe people often in their lives can experience increased security as in some way inconveniencing them in their lives, in their personal lives, in their work lives. And so they do get to be seen as in conflict, but they are not always in conflict. And whenever we have an opportunity to do both, to improve security and usability at the same time, we really need to take it. So that'll be another theme of what we talk about. So OMB released, and this is a screenshot of our website, where over the fall we published a draft federal zero trust strategy. The final version will be coming out soon and will include everything I'm talking about in this presentation. This zero trust strategy is something that we have published partly as one of the lines of work in the cybersecurity executive order, with a whole range of initiatives. And some policy requirements, some pilot initiatives, some normative language, pushing the federal government and civilian agencies in the direction of what many people call a zero trust architecture, which to very pithily try to sum that up, revolves around really strong, a more sophisticated approach to least privilege, to moving away from a perimeter, especially a network perimeter inside organizations, and moving away from creating kind of a safe internal space where people and devices move around freely, and instead creating an environment where people and their devices are verified all throughout the process, and that anomalous patterns or unusual activity are noticed, and eventually organizations can move to a place where they are automatically monitoring and enforcing on more sophisticated rules and permissions than they're able to do today. That is certainly an incomplete description, as this is sort of a wide-ranging initiative, and it can be a fuzzy term. But we have really laid out what we think are the most important priorities in this area and what the federal government's strategy for getting there will be. So I encourage you to go look at it. And so as part of this, we have made one of our key priorities defense against phishing. Phishing is one of the most common ways that footholds are gotten in an enterprise for an adversary. And we really want to focus on having clear order of magnitude better defenses against that kind of attack. And so I may be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but I want to take just a couple slides here and show the threat model specifically that we are really talking about here, as we're trying to approach it with this in mind. So we are very concerned about phishing as it is practiced today in the 2020s, where we have automated, cheap, scalable, high-scale phishing services that can convincingly pretend to be a website to the user, and can convincingly pretend to be a browser to the real website. So these phishing services can play both parts when they need to. So they can have it, and we are concerned about the kinds of multi-factor authentication out there that do not protect against phishing the way it is practiced today. So if somebody has been successfully fooled into coming to a phishing site that has convinced the user that they're the real site, there's no reason to think that the user wouldn't enter a one-time code along with their password into that phishing site. And the phishing site, because it can also pretend to be a browser to the real website that it's spoofing, the phishing site could just be a completely automated, hands-off process of passing that stuff along, with the real website participating and sending the user the real one-time code because it thinks a real browser is approaching it. I think much of this audience probably understands this dynamic. I do want to emphasize as well, that we're quite aware that push notifications that can be defeated in the same way. These are things where instead of being given a one-time code, a user's phone may be given an approve or reject push notification where the user can just hit a button and get into the site. Certainly some very clear usability benefits there, but we are concerned about the possibility, and we see clear reporting about phishing sites also taking advantage of the weaknesses in these methods. And though it's a little bit different than somebody entering a one-time code, it really is a matter of, since the user believes they are logging into the real phishing site, there really is no reason that they wouldn't hit the approve or reject button, or they wouldn't hit the approve button to get in. And we've certainly seen reports of adversaries who have come across somebody's password, just going and trying to log into their website, just causing the push notification to be delivered to somebody's phone out of band and just hoping that they'll hit approve. And sometimes that works. So it's with this threat model in mind that we are trying to create a clear baseline among civilian federal agencies around not using multi-factor authentication methods that don't resist phishing in this way. Which includes one-time code methods, such as are typically practiced with SMS, various versions of OTP, push notifications. So what that means is in the federal government, we do have PIV, personal identity verification. People are most commonly used to seeing that in the card form that many employees carry around with them. I have one sitting on my computer right now. The federal government is fortunate to have PIV, and has been fortunate to have this for many years, as the PIV's use of client certificates actually does break the phishing threat model that I just talked about, and does defend against phishing. What we're also trying to do here, at the same time as we're restricting the use of multi-factor methods that don't resist phishing, we're really specifically calling for broadening the use of other kinds of phishing-resistant methods, and that's FIDO2 and WebAuthn in the real world, into federal agencies alongside PIV. And we're trying to be really as clear as we possibly can that this is something that agencies, can and should be doing now, for a number of reasons, and including for the things that have made PIV successful at defending against phishing in its use of client certificates at a PKI also do create interoperability challenges with certain kinds of systems in the 15, 20 years since PKI and client certificates were first kind of brought into the web and internet ecosystem. So we really expect to see PIV and FIDO and WebAuthn based authenticators in commingled use through the federal government and other weaker methods, weaker in the context of phishing specifically, discontinued. So this is a sort of a clear line and decision that we're making here. And I do also want to mention that NIST is working to formally accommodate a broader range of authenticators as they update the derived PIV spec. For those who follow this space closely and know their NIST special publications and FIPS publications by heart, FIPS 201-3 was published yesterday formally, and lays the groundwork for some of this. So more to come on that. We're also in the vein here of interoperability across contexts. So we are also talking some about public authentication. For the most part, our zero trust strategy is really focused on enterprise security, but this is really something where enterprise security and public security are connected. There really is not a way to disentangle them entirely. And as a matter of course, the general public needs many options and for them to be able to access government services in an equitable fashion. So what we're doing here is requiring that public-facing services in the civilian government that use multi-factor authentication and offer that to external non-government employees include the option of FIDO2 and WebAuthn. The position we're taking here is that we're adding options and not imposing restrictions. And so it should be a strict equity and accessibility upside here, but we want to make sure that the federal government is offering people the options that they would need to protect themselves from phishing if they want to and can use that method. It's also just it's like I said, it's not that easy to draw clear lines between enterprise and public context when it comes to this stuff, particularly because in the federal government, we have a lot of services that sort of cross both of these lines. There's a lot of partner interactions that the federal government has. There's a lot of use cases where the federal government has services that are not used by the whole general public, but by specific subsets. Maybe they're contractors, maybe they're state and local agencies. It's going to be important for us to be able to use the same things as people span different systems. And that's part of what having industry standards like this is all about. And I'll also mention, we are also making it clear that it's not appropriate to collect data about the make and model of the user's device, the technical term for that being attestation in a non-enterprise context. And that it's important that users have their own choice of authenticators out on the public internet. And so for public-facing systems, really discouraging agencies from collecting attestation data. So one last bit here, I'll talk about the requirements, which is a fairly small one, but we remain enthusiastic about the potential for passwordlessness, just like I'm sure the rest of this crowd is, in government services as well. We certainly see that as part of the future of where the government should go. As Jeremy mentioned earlier, passwords are not dead yet, and when they are in use, there are some sort of long overdue things that we need to clean up and how we manage strong passwords in the federal government, which are regular password rotation, making people change their password every 90 days, every 120 days, regardless of whether there's been a security incident of some kind, and special character requirements, forcing people to use uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers. These have at this point been widely studied and demonstrated to reduce security as well as reduce usability. And so this is one of those opportunities that we have to improve security and usability at the same time. And these have been laid out pretty clearly by NIST now in their digital identity standards for several years, and we're really doubling down on these as quite firmly. So I want to talk just a little bit here about like kind of a looking forward mentality here. So in addition to, we've just talked about what we're doing and what we're hoping to achieve for multi-factor authentication in enterprise and public contexts. More generally, we're very excited about where this field is going. Particularly excited about, to use a technical term here, platform authenticators, right? Using onboard devices, these authenticators that are baked into the regular, the laptops and phones that regular people already have in their lives. And these are where the action is going to be for most people, right? It's unlikely to be the case that we'll have everybody carrying portable security keys around on their keychain and keeping a backup in at home somewhere or a safe deposit box. While that is a pattern you'll see a lot of sort of security-minded power users take today, that's unlikely to be the pattern that is used by mainstream people on the internet, including the ones that are using government services they need to get into and that need to be secure. So we're really excited about platform authenticators. Their potential really remains very unexplored. I have a screenshot up here, by the way, of login.gov, which recently has released a dedicated UX workflow for platform authenticators. So I've screenshotted here so you can see it's, so in terms of what I'm referring to with platform authenticators, this is an example in the screenshot of Windows Hello of using the onboard fingerprint reader to log into a website instead of just logging into your laptop itself. And so to talk a little bit about this, there's an opportunity here to enable some very new user experiences. Like we haven't really had the opportunity to revisit assumptions around how users log into systems for a long time. There's some extremely standard UX patterns for logging into websites that we at this point, many people have sort of stopped thinking about. And so over the last few years, a number of ways that people have really started integrating things like FIDO2 and even platform authenticators have been essentially to graft it on as a second factor method. Obviously, as we move towards passwordlessness, there are in those situations, it's not going to be used as a second factor necessarily. This really feels like a space where we have the web APIs and the sort of the interaction now between different layers of the UX stack. We have the participation of the operating system, we have the participation of a secure enclave, we have the participation of the browser and the website, all speaking the same language. And so we really have an opportunity to try out new patterns. And there's a period now where we have all this together where we should be encouraging creativity and finding what those new best practices are. And with an eye over time here towards taking some of the patterns that we find and grounding them in usability research, finding the ones that work measurably well in the real world, and starting to make a point to coalesce around the terms that we find that are understandable to people and the patterns that seem to work well. So this is a the sort of expansion and then coalescing is something that we see likely to happen over the next few years and think is very positive. For both the enterprise and the public-facing context. We also really are keeping quite an eye towards clearly communicating some really key properties of particularly platform authenticators, though these apply to WebAuthn generally. I think many of the folks on this call, in this conference, understand that the way that for authentication, the way that biometrics are implemented, they never leave the device. The user is really just authenticating themselves to their own device, to their laptop and to their phone. And that laptop or phone is then just sort of vouching to the website that the user did that. They're not passing on the biometric information. We also know that it does because of what I just described, how you're authenticating themselves to your own device, it doesn't actually have to be a biometric. It really can be any other way that you unlock your device. Folks broadly expect that for most people, it's going to be the easiest way to use a biometric, but there is the option of using other things. And for some people, that can be very important. And some people that can be absolutely critical. And from an equity perspective, this is not only just a simpler user experience in general, but onboard platform authenticators like this really also mean that there's not a need to own another device, and that in and of itself is an accessibility and equity improvement. These properties are just not obvious or intuitive to everyone, and one of the things that in this space that we all are going to need to be sensitive to, and I can assure you, the U.S. government will be especially sensitive about it, is really making sure these things are understood by the general public, particularly about their privacy, by just general society and policymakers. It's really, these are hard-won things in this space that people should understand are true. So I think that will be one of the things this ecosystem will be exploring. And I think one of the things in this space that I know many folks in the ecosystem are very cognizant of, but has not yet really been solved, are this concept of what it means for this actually to blow up in a real way for regular people all over the internet, and what it means when it comes time where you have your laptop registered to 60, 100 sites, and then you change your laptop, and then or you drop a phone in the ocean or whatever it might be. Those are solutions. Those are semi-open problems in this space that I know many organizations are working on solving at the moment. And it will just be really important to keep privacy, user choice, and equity in mind as we do that. So I just want to end on a couple of notes here, and if there's time, I'm happy to take a few questions. So we're really trying to get across that when it comes to authentication, the security of enterprises and the general public, they're inextricably interconnected. And we are, from a strategic perspective, we're really trying to approach it that way. And the other thing that is maybe just a general point here is that we really can't keep doing things the way that we always have, or just sort of taking an incremental step and adding on a new thing, but kind of mostly doing things the way that we always have. Like there are some of the stuff we talked about in this presentation are major changes that are uncomfortable for organizations, for companies, and it represents the size of the gap that we're staring at, that we need to cross for online security, for enterprise security, and speaking for the federal government here, for the federal government security. These are major gaps, and we need to be willing to look past some of the preconceptions that we've had about how things need to go. And so hopefully you see that reflected in our strategy. So happy to turn it over from there to questions, and thanks again for having me here to speak today.
Great, thanks, Eric. I know we got time for a couple of questions I see in the queue. So the first one is one I think is on a lot of people's minds, which is the zero trust strategy is in draft. Can you speak to when it may be released in its final form, as well as how long agencies will have to become compliant with the MFA requirements?
It will be released soon. I'll just put the word soon in bold and maybe italicize it. It will be released soon, and the things that I covered in this presentation, I was not caveating as part of the draft, and you will see in the final version.
All right, and the second part of that question, once it's out, what happens next? How long do agencies have to become compliant? How are things going to work there?
So actually, I'm glad you asked that. So there will be some more information on timelines in the final version than were in the draft. But at a high level, we're really looking at, it's not just about multi-factor authentication. We're looking at a major architectural shift for the federal government. And so we know that's a multi-year process. And so we're trying to both design an oversight and timing process that reflects the urgency with which we need to move, and the reality of the size of the work that is happening. So we generally, at a high level, agencies will be asked to provide multi-year plans for what they're going to do, which will include MFA and authentication as one of the components of the work that they're doing. And there's also going to be some things that we would really expect to see on the earlier parts of that multi-year plan. And so while I don't want to comment exactly on the MFA requirements in this context, what I would say is we're trying to balance both some short-term urgency as well as some long-term urgency. which is tricky to do, but I think is the reality of what we're dealing with.
Thanks. And there was one other question, which was, how does this work if, I have a device in the government that's shared across, a few different workers? Given that you talk about platform authenticators, but what might they do for phishing resistant authentication?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and it is absolutely a way to emphasize the need for different options and the fact that there is not one UX pattern and there's not one particular kind of authenticator that's going to work for everybody. In that particular context, or you were talking about shift workers, folks who are working for an organization, and for folks in an enterprise context, that is a possibility for the enterprise to be able to supply them with things that can help meet their needs, and so that's one of the reasons that I think we are able to make some distinguishing here between what's appropriate for enterprise policy and what's appropriate for public use. But I think that is an excellent question that needs to be considered as different patterns evolve in the space of how many devices should folks be registering before it's okay to be passwordless. Do you need a balance of platform and portable? How do other methods fit in public use cases or in non-federal enterprises? That's not something I can answer in a simple way on this call, but it is something that the ecosystem has to answer collectively.
Great, thanks. I know we're right at time now. Really appreciate you coming to speak today. Thanks so much also for the great work you're doing over in the White House. This is exciting to see, and we'll be excited to see the final strategy emerge in the days ahead.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks again.